Whispers of what happened on Madison Avenue still echo through New York's elite circles. A ruthless syndicate boss, a terrified little girl, and a retail worker who risked everything to show kindness. One impulsive firing triggered a domino effect that shattered a corporate hierarchy and ignited an unpredictable, dangerous romance. Fluorescent lights glared off the polished marble floors of Maison de Luce, Madison Avenue's most unforgiving high-end boutique. Corinne Seymour adjusted the collar of her suffocating uniform, her feet aching in required heels. She desperately needed this job. Her sister's tuition at NYU and the mounting medical bills from her late mother's stay at Mount Sinai Hospital rested squarely on her shoulders. Losing this position meant eviction from her tiny Queens apartment. Classical music drifted through the concealed Bose speakers, an elegant facade masking the cutthroat reality of retail. Brenda Wallace, the store manager, prowled the aisles like a hawk. Brenda was a woman who valued a pristine Hermès display over human life, her sharp features permanently pinched in disdain for anyone earning less than six figures. Chaos erupted at precisely 2:15 p.m. A little girl, no older than 7, stumbled through the heavy glass doors. She was alone, her hands clamped tightly over her ears. Her eyes were squeezed shut, and a high-pitched, distressed hum vibrated in her throat. The boutique's sensory environment, the overwhelming scent of heavy Tom Ford perfumes, the bright halogens, the overlapping chatter of wealthy socialites, hit the child like a physical blow. She collapsed right in front of the seasonal Cartier watch display, her small body curling into a tight, trembling ball. The humming escalated into a frantic, breathless scream. Wealthy patrons gasped, clutching their designer bags and stepping backward in disgust. Brenda materialized from the back office, her face flushed with fury. "What in God's name is happening?" she hissed, her voice cutting through the store. She marched toward the child, her heels clicking sharply. "Where are this creature's parents? Security! Get this screaming brat out of here before she ruins the ambiance for Mrs. Astor." Corinne didn't think. She reacted. She recognized the signs instantly. Her younger cousin had autism, and she knew a severe sensory meltdown when she saw one. This wasn't a tantrum. It was pure, unadulterated neurological panic. "Brenda, stop!" Corinne rushed forward, intercepting the manager before she could grab the child's arm. "She's having a sensory overload. You can't just grab her. You'll make it worse." "Excuse me?" Brenda's eyes narrowed into venomous slits. "You are a floor associate, Corinne. Do not tell me how to run my floor. Remove her, now." Corinne ignored her boss. She dropped to her knees, ruining her expensive sheer tights on the cold marble. She kept her distance, not touching the girl but lowering herself to eye level. "Hey, sweetie," Corinne spoke in a soft, steady rhythm, masking her own anxiety. "It's too bright in here, isn't it? It's too loud." The little girl rocked violently, her screams turning into choked sobs. Corinne glanced around and spotted a display of Loro Piana cashmere scarves, items that retailed for $3,000 each. Without hesitating, she pulled a heavy, charcoal gray scarf from the mannequin. "Corinne, put that down immediately," Brenda shrieked. "That is prime merchandise." Disregarding the warning, Corinne gently draped the incredibly soft, heavy fabric over the little girl's shoulders like a makeshift weighted blanket. She didn't force eye contact. Instead, she began a rhythmic, low-frequency hum, a grounding technique she had learned years ago. She reached up and clicked off the direct halogen spotlight, shining down on the Cartier case, plunging their small corner into a soothing shadow. Deep breaths. "Just listen to my voice." "You are safe," Corinne murmured. Miraculously, the heavy pressure of the cashmere and the sudden reduction in light worked. The child's violent rocking slowed. Her screams dialed down to hiccups. She peeked out from beneath the gray scarf, her wide, tear-filled blue eyes locking onto Corinne. "There we go," Corinne smiled warmly. "I'm Corinne. What's your name?" "Mia," the girl whispered, her hands finally dropping from her ears. "Well, Mia, you did wonderfully. It's just a little loud in here. Corinne! Seymour! Brenda's voice boomed, destroying the fragile peace. The manager stood with her hands on her hips, her face a mask of absolute outrage. You have completely disregarded my direct orders. You have compromised $1,000 merchandise on a filthy street urchin. You are a disgrace to this establishment. Corinne stood up slowly, keeping herself between Brenda and Mia. She needed help, Brenda. She's autistic and was completely overwhelmed. I don't care if she is the Queen of England, Brenda snapped, pointing a manicured finger at the door. You are done. Fired. Turn in your name tag, clear out your locker, and get out of my store. And you will be paying for that scarf out of your final, pathetic paycheck. A heavy silence fell over the boutique. Corinne felt the blood drain from her face. Fired. The word echoed in her mind, carrying the weight of impending eviction, unpaid medical bills, and absolute ruin. She looked down at Mia, who was clutching her pant leg, and despite the crushing weight of her own disaster, Corinne didn't regret it. Fine, Corinne said, her voice shaking but resolute. I'll leave, but I'm staying with her until her parents arrive. You will leave this second or I am calling the police, Brenda spat, pulling out her smartphone. Footsteps echoed at the entrance, not the light, clicking steps of a wealthy socialite, but heavy, deliberate, terrifyingly measured strides. The air in the boutique instantly grew 10 degrees colder. 3 men stepped through the glass doors. The 2 flanking the rear were built like tanks, their eyes scanning the room with calculated lethality. But it was the man in the center who commanded absolute, suffocating attention. Lorenzo Rossi. He was a ghost in the high society tabloids, the elusive head of the Rossi syndicate, operating out of the shadows of his legitimate front, Rossi Global Logistics, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than a luxury car. His presence was a masterclass in quiet, dangerous power. His dark eyes, sharp and predatory, swept over the frozen scene. The cowering socialites, the furious manager, the fired employee, and finally, his daughter, Mia. Lorenzo's voice was remarkably soft, a jarring contrast to his terrifying aura. Papa! Mia abandoned the cashmere scarf and ran across the marble floor, launching herself into Lorenzo's arms. He caught her effortlessly, burying his face in her hair. For a brief second, the ruthless Mafia boss vanished, replaced by a father who had just experienced the worst 3 minutes of his life. He had turned his back to pay a street vendor outside Central Park, and she had wandered off into the crowded avenue. Are you hurt, Piccola? He murmured in Italian, scanning her face. Too loud, Mia whimpered, burying her face in his shoulder. The nice lady helped. She made it dark. Mia pointed directly at Corinne. Lorenzo's piercing gaze shifted to Corinne. Corinne felt her breath hitch. There was something undeniably dangerous about him, from the faint scar crossing his jawline to the slight bulge beneath his tailored jacket that looked suspiciously like a shoulder holster. Yet, looking at him, holding his child, she felt a strange flicker of reassurance. Then, Lorenzo's eyes moved to Brenda. The warmth vanished entirely, replaced by a chilling void. I heard a lot of yelling from the sidewalk, Lorenzo said, his voice dangerously low, perfectly modulated. He took slow, deliberate steps toward the center of the room. I heard someone threaten to call the police on the woman who was protecting my daughter. Brenda, who usually prided herself on dealing with powerful men, suddenly looked like a cornered mouse. She swallowed hard, her arrogant posture crumbling. Sir, you must understand. Company policy. Company policy? Lorenzo repeated, tasting the words like poison. He looked at Corinne. You were fired? Corinne nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Just now. Lorenzo turned his full, terrifying attention back to Brenda. You fired her for doing what you lacked the humanity to do. She contaminated merchandise, Brenda stammered, pointing at the discarded scarf. and she disobeyed a direct order to remove the disruption. The disruption, Lorenzo echoed. His free hand, the one not holding Mia, slid smoothly into his pocket. He pulled out a sleek, black smartphone. Who holds the regional lease for this building? Is it still Jonathan Sterling at Vanguard Properties? Brenda gasped, her face turning chalk white. How do you... Lorenzo didn't wait for an answer. He dialed a number, putting it on speaker. It rang twice before a panicked voice answered. Mr. Rossi, what an unexpected honor. Jonathan, Lorenzo said calmly, I am standing in Maison de Luxe on Madison. The manager here, a Brenda Wallace, just referred to my daughter as a disruption and a creature. She also fired an employee for showing basic compassion. Say no more, Lorenzo, please. Consider it handled. The voice on the phone squeaked in terror. Lorenzo hung up. He looked at Brenda, who was now trembling visibly. You are unemployed, Miss Wallace. You will find that no high-end retailer in this city, or any city where my name holds weight, will ever hire you to sweep their floors. Now, pack your locker. He threw her exact words back at her with the force of a physical strike. Brenda burst into tears and scurried toward the back office, the high society patrons watching in stunned silence. Lorenzo turned back to Corinne. The dangerous edge in his eyes softened slightly as he took in her pale face, her ruined tights, and the defiant set of her jaw. She was terrified of him, he could see it, but she hadn't backed down. What is your name? He asked. Corinne. Corinne Seymour. Corinne Seymour. He tested her name on his tongue. My daughter does not take well to strangers. She does not let people touch her when she is overwhelmed. Yet, you managed to calm her in minutes. I just recognized what she needed, Corinne said, keeping her voice steady. Sensory reduction. Grounding. You have a gift, Lorenzo noted. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a heavy, matte black business card. He extended it to her. Since you are suddenly without a job, I am offering you a new one. I need a private caregiver and tutor for Mia, someone who understands her. The salary will be 5 times whatever this pretentious glass box was paying you. Full benefits, private security. Corinne stared at the card. It bore only a phone number and an embossed crest. She looked at the 2 massive bodyguards near the door. She knew exactly what she was stepping into. Working for Lorenzo Rossi wasn't just a job. It was an entrance into an underworld she had actively avoided her whole life. Mr. Rossi, Corinne started, hesitant. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for. Please, Corinne. Mia peeked over Lorenzo's shoulder, her big blue eyes pleading. You made the loud stop. Corinne's heart broke. She thought of her sister's tuition, the eviction notices taped to her door, and the sheer emptiness of her bank account. She looked from the little girl to the terrifying, powerful man holding her. He was offering her a lifeline, but one tangled in razor wire. Slowly, Corinne reached out and took the black card. When do I start? A faint, enigmatic smile played on Lorenzo's lips. My driver will pick you up tomorrow at 8. Welcome to the family, Corinne. Sunlight struggled to pierce the heavily tinted, bulletproof windows of the armored Cadillac Escalade. Corinne sat rigidly in the plush leather seat, watching the chaotic Manhattan skyline fade into the manicured, ultra-wealthy isolation of Alpine, New Jersey. This zip code was legendary, a secluded enclave housing billionaires, celebrities, and men like Lorenzo Rossi, whose true wealth and power could never be accurately quantified by Forbes. The vehicle slowed as it approached a massive, wrought iron gate, seamlessly integrated into a 10-foot-high stone wall. Unseen cameras tracked their approach. The gates swung open silently, revealing a sprawling, modern, brutalist compound constructed of glass, steel, and slate. It was beautiful, but it was unmistakably a fortress. Welcome to the estate, Miss Seymour. The driver, a stoic man named Dominic, rumbled from the front seat. Inside, the house was a stark contrast to the cold exterior. It was warm, flooded with natural light, and meticulously organized. Corinne was introduced to Mrs. Gable, a stern but kind-faced housekeeper who had practically raised Lorenzo and then shown to her quarters a suite that dwarfed her entire queen's apartment, complete with a private balcony overlooking the Hudson River. But Corinne had no time to marvel at the luxury. Her priority was Mia. The first 2 weeks were grueling. Establishing a new routine for an autistic child, especially one who had recently lost her mother in a still unexplained accident 3 years prior, required monumental patience. Corinne utilized every tool she had learned from caring for her cousin. She created visual schedules using laminated cards, established a strict sensory diet to regulate Mia's nervous system, and transformed a spare study into a low-stimulation sanctuary filled with weighted blankets, soft textured mats, and noise-canceling headphones. Lorenzo was a shadow, but an ever-present one. He spent his days in his home office, a soundproof room guarded by 2 men at all times, orchestrating international shipping routes and, Corinne suspected, far darker enterprises. Yet, every evening at exactly 6 o'clock, the door would open. The ruthless syndicate boss would shed his tailored Tom Ford suit jacket, roll up his sleeves, and sit cross-legged on the floor of the sensory room, letting Mia explain her extensive collection of oceanography books to him. Corinne observed him during these moments. The hard, violent lines of his face would soften. The dangerous glint in his dark eyes would melt into absolute adoration. "You have done more for her in 14 days than the last 3 specialists combined," Lorenzo said one evening. Mia had fallen asleep on the textured mat, clutching a plush stingray. Corinne looked up from where she was sorting visual cards. Lorenzo was leaning against the doorframe, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse skip. "She just needed someone to speak her language, Mr. Rossi," Corinne replied quietly, standing up to stretch her aching back. The specialists from Mount Sinai Kravis Children's Hospital were highly clinical. Mia doesn't need a clinic. She needs a safe harbor. "Lorenzo," he corrected, his voice a low, gravelly hum that sent a shiver down her spine. "In this house, you call me Lorenzo." He pushed off the doorframe and walked toward her. The sheer physical presence of the man was overwhelming. He stopped just a foot away, close enough for Corinne to smell his cologne, a rich blend of cedar and bergamot. "I investigated your background, Corinne," Lorenzo stated, his eyes locking onto hers. "It wasn't an apology. It was a fact. Your sister's tuition at NYU, the crushing medical debt from your mother's oncology treatments under Dr. Harrison Templeton, the eviction notices." Corinne stiffened, a flash of defensive anger overriding her intimidation. "I don't appreciate being spied on." "I don't employ ghosts to guard my daughter," Lorenzo countered smoothly. "I needed to know what could be used against you, what your vulnerabilities are." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of heavy parchment, handing it to her. Corinne unfolded it. It was a certified bank statement, her mother's medical debt, an astronomical sum that had kept Corinne awake crying for 2 years, was at 0. Her sister's NYU tuition was paid in full through graduation. She stared at the paper, the numbers swimming as tears rushed to her eyes. "Why?" she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "My salary is all ready." "Your salary compensates you for your time," Lorenzo interrupted, stepping closer. He reached out, his calloused thumb gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. The touch was shockingly tender for hands capable of such violence. "This is a debt of gratitude. You shielded my heart on Madison Avenue. You asked for nothing, yet you gave everything. You are under my protection now, Corinne. No one in this world will ever collect a debt from you again." The air between them crackled, thick with unspoken tension. Corinne looked up into his dark eyes, realizing with terrifying clarity that she wasn't just working for a monster, she was falling for the man beneath the myth. The fragile peace of the Alpine estate shattered 3 weeks later. It started, subtly. Lorenzo grew distant, his evenings with Mia cut short by hushed, furious phone calls in Italian. Security around the perimeter tripled. Corinne noticed Dominic and the other guards wearing heavier tactical gear beneath their jackets. The underlying tension broke surface during a rare outing. Mia had been doing so well that Corinne suggested a highly controlled trip to the American Museum of Natural History to see the blue whale exhibit. Lorenzo hesitated, the protective paranoia evident in his rigid posture, but he eventually agreed, under the condition that he accompanied them along with his right-hand man Silas and 4 other guards. Silas was a man Corinne instinctively disliked. He possessed a shark-like smile and cold, calculating eyes that lingered on Corinne a second too long. He had been Lorenzo's underboss for 5 years, but there was a palpable friction between them lately. The museum was closed to the public for a private VIP hour, an arrangement that cost Lorenzo a small fortune, but ensured Mia wouldn't be overwhelmed by crowds. They stood in the Milstein Hall of Ocean Life, the massive fiberglass whale suspended above them in the blue-tinted light. Mia was ecstatic, flapping her hands happily and reciting facts about krill consumption to Lorenzo, who listened with rapt attention. Corinne stepped back to give them space, her eyes wandering the dimly lit hall. That was when she noticed Silas. He wasn't watching the exits. He was standing near the shadows of the dioramas, texting furiously on an encrypted burner phone, a device strictly forbidden on Lorenzo's security details, as all communications were supposed to go through a centralized frequency. Silas looked up, made direct eye contact with a seemingly random maintenance worker near the service elevators, and gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. Corinne's stomach dropped. The survival instincts forged in the rough neighborhoods of Queens flared to life. Something was terribly wrong. She didn't wait to rationalize her fear. "Mia," Corinne called out, keeping her tone light and playful despite the ice in her veins. "Let's go look at the giant squid diorama over here." She hurried forward, grabbing Mia's hand and physically pulling the child and Lorenzo toward the alcove out of the open floor. "Corinne, what is it?" Lorenzo asked, instantly catching the panicked edge in her voice. His hand instinctively hovered over his jacket. "The maintenance worker," Corinne whispered frantically, pushing Mia behind Lorenzo's broad back. "And Silas." They signaled each other. Lorenzo didn't question her. He didn't ask if she was sure. He trusted her instincts implicitly. In a fraction of a second, the adoring father vanished, replaced by the apex predator of the New York underworld. "Dominic!" Lorenzo barked into his lapel microphone. "We are compromised. Evacuate." The silence of the museum was instantly ripped apart by the deafening crack of suppressed gunfire. The glass of the diorama beside them shattered, raining down in a sparkling, lethal shower. "Down." Lorenzo roared, tackling Corinne and Mia to the floor behind the heavy stone base of a display. Chaos erupted. The maintenance workers produced submachine guns from their carts. Lorenzo's guards returned fire, the echoes deafening in the cavernous hall. Mia screamed, the terrible, high-pitched wail of pure sensory and emotional terror, clamping her hands over her ears. "Corinne, keep her down!" Lorenzo ordered, pulling his own weapon, a sleek, customized Sig Sauer. "Silas sold us out!" Dominic shouted over the comms, taking cover behind a pillar as bullets chipped away the marble. "He's making a run for the south exit." "Let him run." Lorenzo's voice was ice-cold, devoid of any human emotion. "Focus on the shooters. Get my family out of here." "My family?" The words echoed in Corinne's mind, but she had no time to process them. Mia was hyperventilating, her eyes rolling back. "Mia, look at me," Corinne demanded, grabbing the girl's face. She ignored the gunfire, ignored the terrifying reality that she was caught in a Mafia hit. She pulled off her own heavy wool cardigan and threw it over Mia's head, creating a dark, enclosed space. She wrapped her arms tightly around the child, providing maximum deep-pressure therapy, and began to hum loudly, the same low frequency she had used on Madison Avenue, trying to vibrate her chest against Mia's to ground her. Lorenzo moved with lethal precision. He didn't fire wildly. Every shot he took was calculated, bringing down two of the approaching assassins before they could flank their position. Move. Now. Lorenzo grabbed Corinne's arm, hauling her up while keeping himself positioned as a human shield between them and the remaining shooters. With Dominic providing covering fire, they sprinted down a narrow service corridor. Corinne carried Mia, adrenaline giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. They burst through an emergency exit into the blinding afternoon sun, practically throwing themselves into the waiting, armored escalade that had violently mounted the curb to meet them. Tires screeched as the heavy vehicle tore away from the museum, running a red light on Central Park West. Inside the SUV, the silence was heavy, punctuated only by Mia's muffled sobs into Corinne's chest. Corinne's hands were shaking violently. She looked down and saw a smear of blood on her hands. "You're hit," she gasped, looking up at Lorenzo. A dark stain was spreading rapidly across the left shoulder of his tailored suit. "It's a graze," Lorenzo said dismissively, wincing slightly as he examined the wound. But his eyes weren't on his shoulder. They were fixed entirely on Corinne. He reached out with his uninjured arm, his hand trembling slightly not from the bullet, but from the adrenaline of almost losing the two people who anchored him to his humanity. He cupped the back of Corinne's neck, his thumb tracing her jawline. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice thick with a desperate, raw emotion that completely stripped away his ruthless facade. "Tell me you aren't hurt." "I'm fine," Corinne whispered, her own tears finally spilling over. "We're fine." Lorenzo let out a ragged breath, pulling Corinne and Mia both into his chest. He buried his face in Corinne's hair, kissing the top of her head with a fierce, possessive desperation. Silas made the worst mistake of his miserable life, Lorenzo whispered against her hair, a chilling promise of violence laced with profound relief. "No one touches what is mine. No one." Rain lashed violently against the reinforced, bulletproof glass of the private medical facility hidden deep within the dense forestry of the Catskill Mountains. This was the Rossi family's ultimate fallback point, a state-of-the-art trauma center disguised as a rustic billionaire's hunting lodge. Inside the sterile, brightly lit, subterranean surgical suite, the smell of antiseptic masked the scent of damp wool and cordite. Dr. Benjamin Aris, a former chief trauma surgeon at Johns Hopkins, who had lost his license due to a politically complicated malpractice suit and was subsequently scooped up by Lorenzo, worked with frantic precision. Corinne stood rigidly in the corner of the room, her hands still stained with dried, rust-colored flakes. She refused to leave. In the adjoining soundproofed recovery room, Mia was finally sleeping, exhausted by a dose of pediatric melatonin and the sheer emotional taxation of the afternoon's terror. The bullet didn't hit the subclavian artery, Lorenzo, but it tore through a significant amount of deltoid muscle, Doctor. Aris stated, his voice tight as he threaded a surgical needle. "I need to administer a local anesthetic at the very least. You're going to feel this." "Do it," Lorenzo gritted out. He was stripped to the waist, his heavily tattooed chest rising and falling in shallow, controlled breaths. He refused anything that would cloud his mind. His syndicate was under siege, his underboss had committed high treason, and his family had nearly been slaughtered in public. Anesthesia was a luxury he could not afford. As doctor, Aris began to suture the torn flesh. Lorenzo didn't flinch. His jaw was locked tight, a muscle ticking wildly in his cheek. His dark, predatory eyes bypassed the surgeon entirely, locking onto Corinne across the room. She looked terrifyingly out of place in this world of violence and sterile steel. Her plain retail clothes were ruined, her hair was a tangled mess, and she was shaking uncontrollably. Yet, when Lorenzo groaned low in his throat as the needle pierced his skin, Corinne moved. She crossed the room, ignoring the heavily armed guards standing by the doorway, and stepped right up to the surgical table. Without a word, she reached out and took Lorenzo's uninjured right hand, lacing her small fingers through his large, calloused ones. Lorenzo exhaled sharply, his grip tightening around her hand like a lifeline. The hard, violent lines of his face instantly relaxed. "You should be resting with Mia," Lorenzo murmured, his voice rough from the pain. "I'm not leaving you," Corinne whispered fiercely, her thumbs stroking the back of his knuckles. "Not until he's done." It took 45 grueling minutes for Dr. Aris to close the wound, bandage it tightly, and administer a heavy dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics. When the doctor finally stepped away to wash his hands, Lorenzo sat up slowly, testing his shoulder with a grimace. "Dominic!" Lorenzo barked, his voice echoing in the cold room. His loyal driver and head of security stepped forward immediately. "Boss, give me the sit-rep." "Silas has gone to ground," Dominic reported grimly, handing Lorenzo a freshly laundered black Henley shirt. "He didn't just plan a hit, he orchestrated a hostile takeover. He's mobilized a rogue faction of our men and partnered with the Petrov Syndicate out of Brighton Beach. They've seized the main logistics hub at Port Newark Container Terminal. Worse, he used a mole inside Rothschild & Co. to temporarily freeze our primary offshore routing accounts. If we don't clear the port and retrieve the hard copy master ledgers from the terminal's main safe by sunrise, Silas will have enough capital and firepower to lock us out of New York permanently." Lorenzo pulled the shirt over his head, hiding the bandages. He looked incredibly dangerous, a wounded apex predator backed into a corner. "Gather the loyalists," Lorenzo commanded, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with pure, lethal authority. "We hit Port Newark in 1 hour. No survivors. I want Silas alive so I can look him in the eyes when I end him, but anyone standing between me and him is collateral damage." "Understood," Dominic nodded, turning on his heel to prepare for war. The room emptied, leaving only Corinne and Lorenzo. The silence stretched, heavy with the impending violence. Corinne stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "You're going back out there. You're injured." "I have no choice, amore mio," Lorenzo said softly. He closed the distance between them, ignoring the throbbing pain in his shoulder. He reached out, gently cupping her face. "Silas broke the ultimate rule. He brought violence to my child. He brought danger to you. I have to tear him out by the roots, or we will never be safe." Corinne looked up at him, her heart pounding against her ribs. In the span of a few weeks, her entire universe had violently shifted. She had gone from folding sweaters for a tyrant on Madison Avenue to dodging bullets for a Mafia don. But looking into Lorenzo's eyes, she realized the most terrifying truth of all. She didn't want her old life back. She was entirely, irreversibly in love with him. "Promise me." Corinne's voice broke, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "Promise me you'll come back to us. Mia needs her father. And I need you." Lorenzo's breath hitched. For a man who controlled empires, those words from a penniless retail worker were the greatest treasure he had ever claimed. He leaned down, capturing her lips in a fierce, desperate kiss. It tasted of salt, fear, and a profound, unbreakable devotion. "I will tear down the city to get back to you," he whispered against her mouth. "Lock the doors. Do not let anyone but Dominic inside. I will return." Midnight swallowed Port Newark Container Terminal in a thick shroud of freezing, salty fog. The labyrinth of massive, rust-colored shipping containers created a deadly, echoing steel canyon. It was a ghost town, save for the heavily armed mercenaries patrolling the perimeter under the harsh glare of industrial sodium lights. Lorenzo moved through the shadows like a wraith. Despite the burning pain in his stitched shoulder, his focus was absolute. He wasn't just fighting for his territory tonight. He was fighting for the right to go home to a woman who had seen the darkest parts of him and stayed. Gunfire erupted near the crane operator's tower as Dominic's tactical team initiated the distraction. The Petrov Syndicate's men returned fire, the night exploding into a chaotic symphony of violence. Using the diversion, Lorenzo slipped silently toward the main administration building. He dispatched 2 guards at the side entrance with terrifying efficiency, barely making a sound before dragging their bodies behind a forklift. He kicked open the door to the executive office. Silas was frantically stuffing stacks of bearer bonds and the encrypted master ledgers into a heavy duffel bag. He froze, a sneer twisting his handsome, arrogant face as he saw Lorenzo standing in the doorway, a suppressed Glock leveled directly at his chest. "I see the good doctor patched you up, Lorenzo," Silas mocked, slowly raising his hands. "Though I'm surprised you left your little retail girlfriend unguarded. She's remarkably pretty for a civilian." Lorenzo didn't speak. He stepped into the room, the silence radiating from him far more terrifying than any threat. "You've gone soft, old friend," Silas spat, his false bravado masking a tremor of genuine fear. "You used to be untouchable. Then your wife died and you became obsessed with fixing that broken, screaming child of yours. You turned down the Petrovs' offer to move their human cargo through our ports because of some pathetic moral high ground. We are criminals, Lorenzo. We aren't saints. You let a child and a nanny make you weak. I'm just taking what you're too soft to hold." "Weak," Lorenzo finally spoke, the words slicing through the air like a razor. He lowered his gun, placing it deliberately on a nearby desk. Silas's eyes widened in confusion, but he didn't hesitate. He lunged for a combat knife strapped to his thigh, charging at Lorenzo with a guttural roar. Lorenzo didn't step back. With blinding speed, he sidestepped Silas's frantic thrust. He grabbed Silas's wrist, twisting it until a sickening snap echoed through the office. Silas screamed, dropping the knife. Lorenzo drove his knee brutally into Silas's abdomen, doubling him over, before delivering a crushing blow to the back of his neck. Silas crumpled to the floor, gasping for air, completely immobilized. Lorenzo stood over him, straightening his cuffs, unbothered by the blood on his knuckles. "You thought my family made me soft," Lorenzo said quietly, retrieving his gun and pointing it down at his former underboss. "You failed to understand that a man with nothing to lose is dangerous, but a man protecting the people he loves is apocalyptic. You are done, Silas." Two hollow thuds echoed in the office. Lorenzo picked up the duffel bag containing the ledgers, turned his back on the body, and walked out into the freezing fog. The gunfire outside had ceased. Dominic was waiting by the armored SUV, his face smeared with soot but victorious. "The port is secured, boss. The Petrovs are retreating," Dominic reported. "Let's go home," Lorenzo said. Dawn was painting the sky in strokes of pale pink and gold when the Escalade finally pulled back through the heavy iron gates of the Catskill safe house. Corinne was asleep in a chair beside Mia's bed when she heard the heavy footsteps in the hall. She shot up, her heart leaping into her throat as the door opened. Lorenzo stood there. He was battered, his clothes smelling of smoke and salt water, his face pale from exhaustion and blood loss. But he was alive. Corinne didn't think. She flew across the room, throwing her arms around his neck, burying her face in his chest. Lorenzo let out a shuddering breath, dropping the heavy duffel bag to the floor so he could wrap his good arm around her, crushing her to him. "I told you I'd come back," he whispered, pressing a kiss into her hair. Mia stirred on the bed, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. She looked at her father, then at Corinne. She didn't scream. She didn't cover her ears. She slid off the mattress, padded over in her socks, and wrapped her small arms around both of their legs. "Papa's home," Mia mumbled sleepily. Lorenzo looked down at his daughter, then into the tear-filled, radiant eyes of the woman who had saved her. He reached into his pocket. He hadn't bought a ring yet, but he had something else. He pulled out the heavy, matte black business card he had given her on Madison Avenue, the one she had kept in her phone case ever since. With a black pen, he crossed out the words, "Private Caregiver." Beneath it, he wrote, "Partner, Equal, Family." He handed it to her, his dark eyes intense and entirely stripped of their walls. "I don't want you as an employee anymore, Corinne. I want you as my wife. I want you to be Mia's mother. I want you by my side to run this empire, legally and safely. I am retiring from the shadows." Corinne looked at the card, a watery laugh escaping her lips. She looked at the terrifying mafia boss who had brought the city to its knees, all to ensure a retail girl and an autistic child could sleep soundly. "I quit my last job because of a scarf," Corinne smiled, reaching up to pull him down for a kiss. "I think I can handle this promotion." Corinne risked everything for a child she didn't know, unlocking a mafia boss's guarded heart and tearing down an empire from the inside out. True power isn't in ruling the underworld, it's in protecting the ones who bring light to the darkness. If this story of unexpected love and fierce loyalty captivated you, please hit like, share this video, and subscribe for more thrilling real-life dramas.